Now welcome to another Let's Talk Some Star Wars, where this time we'll be taking a look at and discussing the results of the poll that asked you what you thought of the 4th episode of Ahsoka. As usual then, I'll also be reading and responding to some of the comments that have been left on the poll. And so let's get right to the results, where we'll see that 54% of people thought this 4th episode of Ahsoka was amazing. Another 24% then said it was pretty good. 12% then went with it being mid or about average, which left 4% of people to say it wasn't very good, and a final 6% to say it was terrible. And I think it's rather interesting to compare these results to the ones for the first 2 episodes and see the improvement here. Not that the results for the first 2 were bad or anything, but we went from 22% of people finding those first 2 episodes amazing to a little over half feeling that way about this one, with about 10% or about half what there was coming up from the average category, it seems. Though yes, there were roughly 10% of voters falling into the bottom choices on both these polls, there wasn't a whole lot of mobility there, if you will, which leads me to wonder just how many people either aren't watching and are rating it poorly just because, or are watching with the intent of not liking it. And though yeah, you are absolutely free to feel however you want and to each their own, I'm sure there are plenty of people genuinely not liking the series right now, and that is fine. But if you truly thought this episode was terrible, I don't know. I'm very curious to know why you feel that way. I mean genuinely curious. I'm not trying to be an ass here. I do want to know why you're not enjoying it, why you thought it was that bad. So do feel free to tell me in the comments below, because there really weren't any left on the poll that went into why someone thought this was a terrible episode. Either way, the series does seem to be on the upward trend with fans, or at least the fans who watch my videos and partake in these polls. And I got my fingers crossed that it stays that way, because I'm someone who probably fell somewhere between pretty good to average for those first 2 episodes, if I'm being completely honest. But thought this last one was amazing and is very much now looking forward to what the series has in store for us next. And so on to the comments, but not before once again just saying thank you to everyone who votes, comments, and watches these or any of my videos across both channels. Also, a huge thank you to those who support this channel and what I do here on Patreon, and who make my Discord server one of the best places on the internet or anywhere to talk some Star Wars. Anyway then, let's get to the comments by starting with the top rated one, which this time came to us from Garrett The Viking, who said, "I loved this episode. Balin is one of the coolest characters in Disney Star Wars now, and the late Ray Stevenson played him brilliantly. I'm so glad Filoni is writing Ahsoka and Sabine as flawed characters. Both of them made some serious mistakes and lost their fight in this episode, which allowed the villains to get away. They have actual struggles to overcome, unlike Rey. There's so much more I could say about this episode, from Marok seeming to be Night Sister magic, which I loved, that he wasn't a named character, to Anakin's appearance to seeing the Ghost in live action. It was one of the best Star Wars TV episodes I've seen." And I really do think one of the best things about this episode is that it wasn't just great because Anakin's Force Ghost, or whatever that might be, that he showed up, that we saw Hayden Christensen again. I think that was simply the cherry on top. You could take that out, and I think more or less it still rates about the same as it did, because it was just some damn good Star Wars all around. I mean, as you pointed out, it dealt with flawed characters making difficult choices and not always exactly making the right ones, and the consequences that then follow. You also brought up Rey, and as I know I've talked about many, many times before, but I do wonder where we'd be right now as a fandom or as a franchise if the story of The Last Jedi had been Luke trying to train Rey to be a Jedi, trying to convince her this is where she belonged, but she's not buying it, only for her to take Kylo's hand at the end, only for her to make the wrong choice because that's where she felt like she belonged because of some strange connection between the two. What if she had made the opposite choice that Luke had made in his middle movie of his trilogy? It's kind of like, poetry, it rhymes. And it certainly makes for a more compelling final film in the trilogy if Rey hasn't essentially defeated or rejected Kylo Ren twice by that point, and maybe you don't have to somehow have Palpatine return to serve as the major threat. But anyway, yeah, take Anakin out of the equation, not that he was in it all that much, and I still love this episode, though something tells me we are about to get a lot more of him and Snips in the next episode. I get a feeling, or maybe I'm just hoping, but I get a feeling this will be something truly special for all Star Wars fans next week. Which then brings us to this comment from Evia Green, who said, "This episode just really captured it all for me. The prequels, original trilogy, even a tiny amount of the new excitement that came with the sequels. Also, I loved seeing Ahsoka lose her composure both when she thought Sabine was gone and when she met with Anakin. I think that after her talk with her old master, she will lose some of her baggage and we'll get a version of Ahsoka that we know and love from Clone Wars. Also Balin. Oh, that man is on his way to become one of my favorite characters in Star Wars. Can't wait for the Friday special and the next episode on Wednesday. And I do like and appreciate how this series is sort of a mix of everything Star Wars. You got some Clone Wars, you got Rebels, prequels, original trilogy, Mandoverse, the EU with Thrawn, and yes, even potentially some sequel trilogy. It's something that's bringing many different things or aspects of Star Wars together, and it's doing it all while taking us to a whole other galaxy, which is kind of ironic. It's quite impressive and cool in that respect, I think. And I do think after this next episode, we may see a slightly less uptight Ahsoka. I think she will unpack a lot of that Anakin Vader baggage and be a bit more like the Ahsoka of old. I get the feeling that Rosario is being directed to act this way, that she is very stoic or a no-fun Jedi, so that there will be an obvious difference when she, again, deals with her Anakin issues, when she's liberated from that and can finally move out from under his shadow. Moving on then, our next comment comes to us from Not Ian, who said, I love the dynamic between Balin and Shin, sort of a dark mirror to the composed, master, impulsive student trope we've seen, or often seen in Star Wars. And from an acting standpoint, those two have amazing presence. And I think Balin and Shin have probably been the best part of the series so far for me overall, which isn't kind of a knock against the other parts, it's just that they've been that good. Especially Ray Stevenson as Balin. There's just something about that presence, as you said, the way he plays the character. There is almost this deep-rooted sadness about him even, which likely comes from the fall of the Jedi that is still impacting who he is today. And the thing is, you tend to like him. You even maybe kind of respect him and root for him a little bit, even though he's on the wrong side, even though he's the bad guy of the story. And their master and apprentice relationship does sort of mirror previous ones we've seen before, but with a little bit of a twist since they are the, again, bad guys. And mainly it mirrors the Obi-Wan Anakin relationship, I think. You've got the wise and kind of patient master trying to deal with the hot-headed and impulsive student. There's also maybe a bit of tension between the two a little bit, but you can also see or feel the respect the apprentice does indeed have for the master. They don't want to let them down, but they also want to grow beyond them eventually. Alright, and next up here we have a comment from Jonathan Gubrid, who said, I wasn't a huge fan of the first 3 episodes, but glad I kept my mind open because this episode was an absolute banger. Felt a lot more like authentic Star Wars to me, especially the lightsaber battle between Ahsoka and Balin. Plus Disney/Filoni actually letting their own characters lose or have flaws for once actually adds some stakes to the story, which I have not felt in a long time. Also, there's this one from Ken Benobi who said, Peter Ramsey knocked this one out of the park. The duels were some of the best I've seen in live action, particularly Balin and Ahsoka. We need more Balin. And yeah, I thought the lightsaber fights in this episode were excellent and looked amazing, especially Balin versus Shin. I liked that this was kind of more 2 old school Jedi going toe to toe. This was more of a prequel era lightsaber fight, right? And for whatever reason, a lot of the other lightsaber fights we've seen on these Disney Plus shows, not that we've seen a ton of them when you really think about it, but they have felt like they're lacking something. They have felt kind of low budget or low effort in some places. They don't feel very cinematic either. But these were different. These felt film worthy. And the funny thing is, I think the best of them may be yet to come. I think we have a lot more lightsaber fights to come in this show, and hopefully they live up to this one or maybe are even better. Moving on to our next comment then, it comes to us from Jonathan Hallberg, who said, I think the first 3 episodes were kind of slow in a bad way, not in an and/or way, but now I felt like it started to hit its stride. Let's just hope it gets even better from here on out. There's also this one from Bihar Monk, who said, this has been the best one for sure. Just wish we could have gotten here a little sooner, by like the end of episode 2 or latest episode 3. I just hope the back half of the series doesn't feel rushed because I want to see a lot of Thrawn. And I do think my biggest complaint about the show, I guess you could say, not that I'm really mad about it or really complaining about it, but the pacing did feel a bit off in the first 3 episodes. I mean, there's slow pacing that keeps you vested because you feel like you're building and building to something bigger. I think Andor in the first 3 episodes does this rather well, though not perfectly either. But then there's a slow pace where you really feel it. Like you really feel like you're just waiting for something to finally happen. And yes, the first 3 episodes of Ahsoka were more in that category, though they weren't terrible again. I don't think I was like bored with them, but I did want something to happen. I was waiting, as I said before, I was waiting for a wow moment to happen. Though when that wow moment finally came, like it did in this 4th episode, it certainly felt worth the wait. And I am very, very curious to see what the back half of this season will look like. As I've mentioned before, we are kind of out of trailer footage or commercial footage other than the few glimpses of Thrawn we've got. So we're going into this blind. We don't really know what this is going to look like, which is exciting. And so are we going to get to Thrawn in this next episode, or maybe the one after that, and then spend quite a bit of time with him from here on out? Or does it take a while yet to find him, as well as Ezra? And we're really only going to be teased with both of them in the final episode or so. That there'll be a good story for another time, or for the next season of Ahsoka, or wherever else this might carry on in. Alright, and now on to a few final comments before wrapping it up, starting with this one from Captain Phoenix Official YouTube, who said, "Amazing, the pace has finally picked up. Great lightsaber action all through the episode, top-notch acting, rest in peace Ray Stevenson. I like what they did with Marok, though I know some won't. Loved the twist, they finally made the jump, and the amount of fan service at the end was just right. This episode was surprisingly great with how it handled fan service. This is how you do a 40-minute episode right." Then we have this comment from Mememon, who said, "This is the most excited I've been for Star Wars since before The Force Awakens came out. They're handling the show amazingly, and it's building so much hype for Thrawn. Sabine and Ahsoka both have flaws. The flaws actually result in some consequences. It's just so great so far. The only 2 things I'm not a big fan of are Sabine getting stabbed and not dying, and the world between worlds. It just seems too powerful." Also here we have a comment from Zach Hawker, who said, "Unbelievably good. Fantastic action, a satisfying twist from Sabine, beautiful visuals, that hyperspace jump and the destruction from it especially. Rosario showed some emotion, the pace was excellent, and of course the Chosen One himself. The cherry on top is getting episode 5 in theaters next week. We will be seeing Dave Filoni's Star Wars on the big screen for what will probably end up being the greatest 49 minutes of Star Wars since the original trilogy." Also here a comment from Art Official Joe, who said, "This was the most Star Wars that Star Wars has been since Disney took over. Best live action episode of them all in my opinion. I'm a grown man and I got a little teary-eyed at the end, not because of Anakin and not because the episode was so good, but because I thought the franchise might just be dead. After this episode, I believe there's hope moving forward, and I'm so excited." And finally here, this comment from Parma Marydog, who said, "I loved that this episode ended with the world between worlds cliffhanger. It was great that we got to see Anakin and Ahsoka in live action. The fact that Marok seems to be reanimated dead person via Night Sister magic is interesting. Now I am really excited to catch next week's episode more than I was before. Admittedly, I did initially feel disappointed because I was thinking, oh, we didn't cut back to the hyperspace ring after the jump it made, and we didn't get to spend more time in the world between worlds in this episode. But that is not me saying this episode dropped the ball in this regard. In reality, I felt that because I wanted to see more, I loved this episode. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you thought of this episode. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you fall somewhere between? Or what did you think of what I or what anyone else had to say about it here in this video? Whatever the case may be, you know what to do. Take to the comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.